I'm Dirk Hohndel. I run open source at Verizon. And to quote Jim Zemlin, this is that other guy.
Yes. Yeah, I'm the other guy, and I've done this before, and we've done this. Dirk said this is apparently the 23rd time we've done it, and the reason we do it this way is I do not enjoy giving public talks. I'm sure a lot of you understand that it's not the most fun thing in the world. So we've come up with this format where Dirk prepares questions that I don't know beforehand, and we have more of a discussion in front of you, and that makes me much comfortable, and hopefully it works for you people too.
Yeah, and usually it works well, and occasionally he throws me curveballs that make me go, what do I do now? So let's see which one this one is. So I'm thrilled to be back in Japan. It's been a few years, sadly. We did our traditional sushi OD last night. And it's always good to be here. Thank you so much for having us. The timing changed. It used to be that the Japan conferences were like in June. And so being here pre-Christmas is actually kind of fun. So I'm quite happy.
And we've been lucky with the weather too.
Yes, it's been gorgeous. So Linus, you released Linux 6.7 RC4 a couple of days ago. And one of the fun things that came out in this is that we are going to have a Christmas or New Year's Eve kernel. Well done, good timing.
Well, I mean, we have releases every 2.5 months. I think 10 weeks is basically what I try to aim for. So this happens every time that Christmas comes around, and either we have the merge window, which is my busy time, is right around Christmas, which really destroys Christmas for me. Or we have the quiet period when we're just trying to find and fix the last few bugs. And this year, happily, Christmas for me is the quiet period when the last few weeks of the release are going on, and we're just waiting to make sure that we have nothing big going on that is a showstopper. And that works really well for me, but it means that all the sub-maintainers and developers who are now preparing for the next version, 6.8, they will be in a slight panic just because they know that after Christmas, my merge window opens, and that's when they are supposed to have all their stuff ready for the next version. So we'll probably delay that by a week or two just because we do that every year to make the timing work out better, because nobody wants to work over Christmas.
Yeah, but so with 6.7, what's exciting? Anything that sticks out to you?
We've actually had for the last almost 20, no, not 20 years, but 15 plus years, we've had a very regular release schedule. And I'm happy to say that 6.7 is turning out to be one of the boring releases. Boring is good. You don't want to have too much excitement, because excitement usually means big bugs. 6.7
bugs
is
with a G, not with a CK.
Yes.
Yeah.
Horrible. But 6.7 is actually slightly unusual. I think it may be the biggest release we've ever had when you just count number of commits. And the reason for that is actually we have a new file system that has been in the works for like a decade. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of new commits coming in for that. But it's still interesting to see that not only are we keeping steady, we are still actually increasing the development speed, and the kernel sizes tend to be going up, which is a good sign, but it obviously also means that there's a lot more work going on, and a lot more work for maintainers to deal with.
Yeah, besides Linus not liking my joke, I want to apologize to the simultaneous translators, because I have no idea how you would translate this into Japanese. So one of the things we've talked a lot about over the last few kernel releases is the introduction of Rust into the kernel. And I think it has been relatively steady and quiet. What's your perception?
Well, so Rust still is at the point where we have the initial infrastructure got merged last year. It's been growing, but we don't have any part of the kernel that really depends on Rust yet. To me, Rust was one of those things that it made technical sense, but to me personally, even more important was that we need to not stagnate as a kernel and as developers. And so I am always excited by trying something new and not getting too comfortable doing the same thing. I mean, I've been working on the kernel now for 32 years. 32 years. And that's a long time to work on one single thing, but it's still interesting because it's not the same single thing. I mean, Linux 32 years ago was very different from what Linux is today, obviously. And I actually often look for things where we can do new things and we can do things differently, because it's so easy to get stuck in a rut and say, this is working just fine, right? And Rust has not really shown itself as the next great big thing, but I think during next year we'll actually be starting to integrate drivers and some even major subsystems that are starting to actively use it. So it's one of those things. It's going to take years before it's a big part of the kernel, but it's certainly shaping up to be one of those things.
So you're writing Rust code yourself, you're reviewing Rust code?
Oh, no. I have been reading Rust code a bit just so that I can make some kind of judgment calls on when something is too horrendous to be included in the kernel. But I have to admit, no, I mean, the kernel, we rely on literally thousands of people. Every single release, we have 1,000 people involved, and they're not the same 1,000 people. Quite often we have people, in fact, for the longest time, we've had the statistics be roughly that every release, about half the people involved send just one patch. And a lot of them never show up again. They may have something small they wanted to fix that they cared about, and they were not really kernel people. They found it for some other reason, and they sent their small patch to the kernel, and they were never interested in doing anything more. But then the other half keeps coming back. And when it comes to Rust, I'm not going to be the one who manages the Rust code, because that's not my expertise, as is true of so many other parts of the kernel. I'm less of a programmer these days than I am. I call myself a technical lead because I'm not a manager. I don't manage people, I manage code. So I call myself a technical lead. My day-to-day work is not programming. It is merging other people's codes, and Rust will be one of those things.
Yeah, so Jim in his keynote pointed out that open source developers sometimes are opinionated. Sometimes they express their opinions. And
I'm sorry.
You have had in the past a reputation for being expressive, and not lately, of course. But one of the things that I've been wondering about, so who is currently on your naughty list? Who are the companies that might...
Oh, I'm not going there. I went there...
Can we get a sign of hands? Should he go there?
No.
Well, Linus...
It's one of those things, you give some company the finger 20 years ago, and that picture keeps coming up every day. So I learned my lesson.
I think it's still the #1 search result when you look for images of you. Yeah. I think that's still the first hit.
But
yes.
I mean, to be honest, I joke, but at the same time, the whole commercial environment has gotten so much better over the last 20 years. We used to be in the situation that it was hard finding documentation for hardware, and some companies would be actively hostile. And that's just not true anymore. I mean, now we have companies that write drivers for their own hardware, and sometimes it's still hard to find documentation because writing documentation is hard, and a lot of companies don't necessarily want to document some of the quirks or bugs in their hardware, but we're in such a good position when it comes to hardware support compared to where we used to be.
Definitely, yeah. But so you talked about the changing environment. The Kernel Summit was just a few weeks ago, and one of the topics that has been very common at the Kernel Summit for many years is this overall question of maintainer fatigue and how draining and stressful this role is. What are we doing to improve the situation, which is not just for the individual maintainers, but for the Linux ecosystem and for the larger open source ecosystem, I guess?
So, I mean, as you say, I mean, this has been a thing that has been coming up for the longest time. It turns out it's hard to find maintainers. Yeah. It's much easier to find developers. We have a lot of developers, every release as mentioned. But to be a maintainer, some people think that you have to be this kind of super developer that can do it all, but that's not actually true. But to be a maintainer, you have to have a certain amount of good taste. You can judge other people's code, and some of that may be innate, but a lot of it is just, it takes practice. To look at other people's code and easily be able to tell, is this a good approach or a bad approach? It's usually just a matter of having done it for many years. So to be a maintainer and be good at your job, you have to do it for a long time. We do have a lot of great maintainers, but the other part of it is you have to be there all the time. Or you have to find other maintainers that you can work with so that you schedule around your vacations and things like that. For me, being there all the time is not a problem because I love doing what I'm doing. So I was on vacation a couple of months ago, and I had my laptop with me, and if I didn't have my laptop with me, I would have been so bored because it is what I do, and it is what I've been doing for a long time. But I realized that's not the life for everybody, especially when you have to put in years of your life into this. So we don't have a solution to this. We've been talking about different solutions, and many of our maintainer groups have formed different solutions. And it turns out one of the issues is people are hard. Code is easy. To write code, you have a right answer and you have a wrong answer. People relationships are hard, and being able to work with other developers and work with other maintainers and work, especially when you have maintainers that work on different things and they have different goals and they want to push their area in one direction and another maintainer comes in from another area and wants to pull it in another direction, it can be very stressful. And it's one of those things where a lot of people seem to think that open source is all about programming, but a lot of it is about communication too. And it doesn't need to be the same person. Quite often it's good to have your programmer that does not have a lot of social skills, right? It happens, right? And then you may need to have a maintainer who's the one who translates, and I say translates not, I mean, in Japan, we have the language issue too in many open source projects. But when I say translates, I don't necessarily mean language. I mean the context, the reason for the code. And that's, again, one of those jobs of a maintainer to kind of take the developer output and translate it into the project. And again, makes for a tough job and a certain kind of person. And we're lucky to have as many maintainers as we do. But if you want to be a maintainer, trust me, there's room at the top, so to speak.
But this is actually where I wanted to go next, because if you look at the top, if you look at the people at the sub-maintainer level, most of them these days are either like Greg and have no hair, or they are...
That's rough.
Or they're like the two of us and they have very...
It's not completely gray yet.
Some people kid themselves that their hair isn't completely gray yet. Others have accepted that. But kidding aside, the leadership, what you call at the top of the maintainer tree, we are certainly seeing a significant aging there. Obviously, as time goes by, that has to happen. But if I look 5 years into the future, and a lot of people will start hitting the 60s, and the first ones will approach the 70s. So where do you see this going?
So, I mean, to some degree, it's a good problem to have. I mean, so the Kernel Summit was, what, a month ago, something like that?
3 weeks.
3 weeks ago. And it was actually the first year when I personally reacted to the fact that, yes, a lot of us are going gray. But at the same time, part of the reason really is the Maintainer Summit is, we try to limit it to about 30 people or so. Of those 30 people, at least 3 of them had been around for more than 30 years. Mm-hmm. So they had been around since like the first year of Linux existing. And the fact that they are still around and still active and still end up coming to Maintainer Summits means that, yes, they are older and grayer, but it also means that we actually have a community where people do stick around.
But that's a double-edged sword.
Absolutely. And it's, for example, one of the things I liked about the Rust side of the kernel was that there was one maintainer who was clearly much younger than most of the maintainers, and that was the Rust maintainer. And we can clearly see that certain areas in the kernel bring in more young people. We had at the Maintainer Summit, we had this clear division between the file system people who were very careful and very staid, and they care deeply about their code being 100% correct, because if you have a bug in a file system, the data on your disk may be gone. So these people take themselves very seriously and their code very seriously. And then you had the driver people who are a bit more, okay, especially the GPU people seem to be like, anything goes, right? And you did notice that on the driver side, you have a much easier time finding young people. And that is traditionally how we've grown a lot of maintainers, including, I mean, Greg with no hair. So.
I apologize, Greg. You can beat me up later. I mean, my forehead is getting larger every year, so what can I say? It's not far away from me. Let's switch gears completely and talk about something else. You cannot possibly give a presentation today, as Jim proved to us, without talking about artificial intelligence and large language models. I typically say artificial intelligence is autocorrect on steroids, because all a large language model does is it predicts what's the most likely next word that you're going to use, and then it extrapolates from there. So not really very intelligent. But obviously the impact that it has on our lives, on the reality we live in, is significant. Do you think we will see LLM written code that is submitted to you as a pull request?
I'm convinced it's going to happen, yes. It may well be happening already, maybe on a smaller scale where people really use it more as a help in writing code. But it's clearly something where automation has always helped people write code. I mean, this is not anything new at all. We don't write machine code anymore. We don't even write assembler. And now we're moving on from C to Rust. So I don't see this as something as revolutionary as all the news talk is every day about AI. It's not an area I obviously work with. I'm still very low level. I got into kernels because I love the low level hardware details, and that's why I'm still there.
But so you say you expect this can help people write code, this can help people get started. But then if we look at the previous conversation and the challenges around code reviews and maintaining, so do you think that large language models will get to the point that they can help us review code, that they can help maintain subsystems?
I hope, because that's certainly one of the areas which I see them really being able to shine, to find the obvious stupid bugs. Because, I mean, how many people here are actually programmers in this room?
A lot.
So, a fair number. A lot of the bugs I write, a lot of the bugs I see other people write, they're not like subtle bugs. A lot of them are just the stupid bugs that you did not think about, and you don't need any kind of higher intelligence to find them. But having tools that warn, I mean, we have compilers that warn about the obvious, really obvious ones, but having LLMs that warn about slightly more subtle cases where it may just say, this pattern does not look like the regular pattern. Are you sure this is what you mean? And the answer may be, no, that was not at all what I meant. You found an obvious bug. Thank you very much. So I do think that LLMs are going to be a big, you call them disparagingly, like autocorrects on steroids. And I actually think that they're way more than that, and how most people work is, we all are autocorrects on steroids to some degree. And I see that as a tool that can help us be better at what we do. But I've always been optimistic. The whole
hopeful.
Hopeful was the word you had.
Yes. Helpful, hopeful, and humble.
Hopeful and humble. That's my middle name. But on the other hand, I mean, I have been so optimistic that 32 years ago, I was stupid enough to think that you can write a better kernel than anybody else. So you have to kind of be a bit too optimistic at times to make a difference. So my approach to LLMs really has been that, hey, this is wonderful. This is going to...
I love seeing the optimism. I don't necessarily share it.
No, a lot of people disagree with it.
One of the things that I worry about in all this is we see the hallucinations. We see, and that's a technical term for LLMs, they do hallucinate and they do make up stuff. And so the more they are being put into the position where they will automatically do things without an actual human being there to catch them, the more this becomes scary. Not scary as in they will rule the world, and not in the sci-fi sense, but in the so many bugs that will happen and that will affect our lives or our code.
Well, I see the bugs that happen without them every day, so that may be why I'm not so worried. I think we're doing those just fine on our own.
And I don't think I can end the AI topic on a better highlight. So let's go from there to my next topic I want to talk about, which is data, which is, of course, very related to AI, actually. So 30 years ago, when we started on open source, it felt like code was the thing that controlled the future, and the ability to collaborate, to have this, as Jim described it, billions of dollars worth of code that we have created is the determining factor of the future. That was certainly true in the 1990s. If I look at our lives today, it seems it's far more data that controls our world. What the Googles and Amazons and Apples of the world know about us. So do you get engaged in the discussions about open data? So repeating that revolution just in a different realm?
No. So one of the things I enjoy most about open source has always been that I can let go and not care about the things that are not my side. I mean, that's been true very much inside the kernel too, where there are areas where I concentrate my personal effort much more than others, and I let other people who maintain that side worry about like networking, things like drivers. And the same is very much true of all the LF projects. I may be one of the more high-profile employees of the Linux Foundation, but I keep myself into
Which
the
is
kernel.
named the Linux
Yes.
Foundation.
Yes, no, it's a great name. Yeah, but I enjoy the fact that open source, and not even open source, the notion of openness
Yes.
has gotten so much more widely accepted. And I enjoy it particularly because I remember what it was 30 years ago when I had started this project and people would ask me why, right? And people would say, but how do you make money, right? And this used to be a question and it never comes up anymore. So the fact that we are even talking about open data and nobody even asks, why would you do that? I think that's the real deal here.
Yeah.
That openness has, I think, to some degree become the standard within the industry. And people kind of take for granted that when you have to have big projects, whether they are programming or data, and you end up having them so big that you need to share between companies, the easiest way to share is to just make it open and use a license that allows for completely wide sharing. And I mean, this is what one of the things LF does. So the fact that LF does open data is great, but that does not mean that it's a thing I do.
But I think that if you reflect on Jim's keynote, a lot of what the Linux Foundation is focused on is that collaboration beyond the individual, beyond the company, to collaborate and do things as a society. And without trying to be too hyperbolic here, there is a very huge role in having that neutral place that people can come together and do things that...
Well, I mean, that is literally why I'm working at Linux Foundation.
Yeah.
Because I refuse to ever work at a Linux company. Because I did not want to be in the situation where one company or one commercial entity would be the special place. So I mean, I agree 100%. I mean, you need to have a neutral place, and that's why I gave my name to the Linux
Foundation. So open data, what do you think beyond that will be the direction this openness is taking? We went from open code to open data. Where are we going with this? Where is the...
This is the 5-year, 10-year thing, and my answer is always the same thing. I'm a plodding engineer. I look at the step in front of me. I don't make grandiose announcements of this is what the world will be 10 years from now.
I remember there's this email of this guy. He says, hey, I started this fun little project. It's just a little hobby.
Well, I mean, that kind of proves how bad I am at predicting the...
Yes, this is why there are 1,000 people in this room, because you're so bad at planning. I get it.
Yes. Now, I actually think a lot of people sometimes think that having a long-term plan is great. And I don't think it works. It doesn't work in politics. The whole 5-year planning thing did not work so well in that area. And I don't think it really works in technology very much. You have to have kind of an idea of where you'd like to go. But if you don't look right in front of you, you will just stumble around and you'll never actually get to that top of the mountain, right? Yeah. You may have a great big journey in mind, but it's still one step at a time. And that is particularly true in technology, where you can't just change the world in one big leap. You have to take all the small steps to improve your technical side until you get there.
Well, and since you like to think in relative near-term future goals, so I figure I'll give you a challenge for the end of our conversation today. So when the Open Source Summit comes back to Japan next year, where should it be? I'm suggesting Okinawa. How about you?
Well, that would... I mean, I actually enjoy Tokyo, and I'm here with my wife, so we've been walking around and doing odd shopping malls and have been having a good time here. But Okinawa sounds good to me too.
And on that note, thank you, everyone. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.